I'm joined by Scott, the CEO of Fighting Fair, which is a conflict resolution company based in Australia. And you have worked with more than 50,000 professionals on conflict, communication, and team culture. That's amazing.
That's a lot, isn't it?
Clearly, you have been doing this for a long time. You hold a degree in science and social work. You are a Harvard-trained negotiator and accredited mediator. You've also got your own podcast. And so tell me about that podcast.
It's about conflict stories. So we get on very different, interesting characters who are happy to share their conflict situations and past situations. So we've just had a pretty well-known journalist on there who had her father on there who had her father sued her, and she spoke about how that came about and what came out of that. So it's a pretty wild story. So yeah, we just have some really interesting. It's about finding the transformative part of conflict. So yeah, conflict stories is what it's called. It's very interesting.
I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes so that when people are looking for you, they're looking for your podcast, they can find it. You're best known for is that you are the conflict whisperer and fun maker.
This is true. I do like conflict, and I deal with a lot of conflict, and I see the potential in conflict. But I also do a lot of training in conflict and difficult conversations and team culture, etc. And so they're very heavy topics. So I guess one of my gifts is that I can make it fun and light and enjoyable. So we talk about the heavy stuff, and at the same time we have some fun and make it enjoyable so people sort of get involved.
I have been to your workshops, 2 of them now, and they've always been engaging, extremely fun, while you end up taking away tons and tons of useful, practical advice. I want to set the theme in terms of the conversation that we're going to have today. The people that I work with tend to be in sales, active sales roles. So salespeople, sales leaders, general managers, and business owners. What I want to try and achieve in today's conversation, given you are this expert in both difficult conversations and conflict, is connect the dots for people in sales on how in everyday life, when they are selling, they face some sort of conflict or a challenging situation. And if they can learn the skill, or if they can learn some practical advice on how to handle those situations, I believe it helps their performance. If you are a salesperson that's listening, you are going to face some of these challenges in your daily work life. Customer problems. So within your selling role, you're engaging with customers, your business provides some sort of product or service, and in the delivery of that, there is some sort of a problem. Or you might have different scenarios where you are looking for new customers. You've got a whole lot of value that you can deliver. And when you're in front of customers trying to articulate that value, you get price objections. You do all this work, you've prepared, you've stood in front of the customer, and then they say things like, look, that all sounds very good, but you're too expensive. And now what do you do next? It might be having to raise your prices, or it could be having to deal with other divisions within your own business where you're just not getting the results that you're looking for. And because you're not getting the results you're looking for with those teams, your sales numbers are suffering. And maybe there's a team leader or there's a sales manager that now has to have a conversation with you because you are off your numbers. Now, let me talk about sales leaders. So for sales leaders, some of the scenarios you might face is customer escalations. There has been some sort of a challenge. Your customer isn't happy with the response they've had from your customer services team, maybe your salespeople, maybe your operations people, etc. And now that issue has been escalated to you and you need to deal with it because that customer's future business might be at risk. Or you are pulled into high stakes negotiations. There is a big deal. The salespeople have done their job, but now those terms need to be negotiated so that the customer and your business actually gets a really good outcome. Those might be some of the challenges that you're facing. Maybe it's team performance. Maybe it's your selling culture or your business culture. Those might be some of the sales leader challenges that you face. And as I give those descriptions, Scott, what do you think? Do you think I'm facing conflict, and do you think I've got some difficult conversations to be had?
Yeah, I mean, they're challenging. A lot of those are challenging, and it's yeah, some of them are trickier than others. It's interesting because when you gave the sort of intro at the start, what I thought of is that often people aren't trained up in these skills, and I think I don't see many people who are naturally gifted at dealing with conflict or having those difficult conversations. I think it is something that most people need to learn because they are challenging. They do bring up emotions that we have to manage. And it's something that, yeah, it doesn't come naturally for many people. So it's understandable that most people find them difficult and challenging. And yeah, I think there is often a lack of education in how to manage these situations.
This would be my 21st, maybe 22nd year in terms of being in an active sales role. Any of the situations that I would have faced, the examples that I just gave, I would have just tried to tackle without necessarily knowing any of the nuances of how to handle those situations, and even worse, zero preparation. I can hand on heart say that I wouldn't have handled very well to begin with in my sales career. But after going through the school of hard knocks, you slowly figure out what might be some of the things that you can continue doing and some of the things that you need to stop doing. I think most sales lead organizations, salespeople, and sales leaders would probably have that misconception, which is this isn't a skill. Either you know how to do it based on experience or you don't.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I always think of new leaders in any sector. Almost, it's like when you become a leader, it's almost like you're expected to be able to deal with a whole lot of things, and it's probably unreasonable. And I think again, it's obviously you can learn through experience, and that's really valuable. I think it's also just acknowledging that there's some areas that are tricky and we do need training in to be better at. Just like the sales process, if you're not good at sales, you've got to learn how to do that. There's tools and techniques and strategies and mindsets that help, just like in a conflict or a difficult conversation.
I remember moving into a sales leadership role. My title changed. I got a new contract. It's not like my skills increased overnight, but sometimes those are the expectations, right? Let me ask you the simple question around how do we even understand when we're in some sort of a conflict or are now having to have a difficult conversation or about to face a difficult conversation? So how do we identify it?
I think very simply, if I was to define a difficult conversation, it's just anything you find hard to talk about. Because you feel uncomfortable and you are worried about how the other person's going to feel. They're likely to react to what we may share or the issue or concern we may want to address, or the objection in sales language. We get a sense this is going to be tricky, either for us or for them, or probably for both. And I think when we sense that, we know it's either going to be a difficult conversation, and depending on probably the extent of the emotion attached is whether it turns into conflict. Because what conflict is what it has, because we could have a disagreement, Varun, and if we're both comfortable with that, we sort of we may not agree with each other's perspective, but we're willing to try to understand each other's perspective. And if we walk away feeling, okay, well, you know, Varun saw it that way, I saw it this way, and we move on and we're okay with that, that's not a conflict. If I got emotional, I reacted to something you said and that wasn't resolved, and I'm carrying that, then that's when I think it turns into a conflict, because it's going to impact our future workings, relationship, or whatever it might be. So I think it's a lot of the times this is defined by the emotional component of the situation and how you're connecting or disconnecting or relating to the other person.
If I've understood it correctly, are you saying that if I face a scenario where I'm a little bit uncomfortable about having this discussion based on how someone might react, depending on how that conversation goes, it can turn into conflict?
Yeah, it can. I mean, it may already be conflict. If it's not, that's one of the worries, is like, what are the consequences if we can't sort this out? What could be the impact? And you know, as you said, some people just jump into it. I'm going to share a little difficult conversation I had yesterday with one of my brothers, and it was really tricky because he got on the phone and was pretty attacking right from the start. And there was even a few F-bombs in there. And it was tricky for me because I haven't spoken to him for a while. And he got on the phone and he was triggered by something that was happening within the family dynamics. And so, yeah, he's using the F-bomb. And so the first thing I'm doing, obviously, it was hard for me to manage that and not react to what he was saying. And so I had to manage those emotions, which is one of the hard things about conflict, obviously. So I did manage them. I also put in a clear boundary at the start, because for me, the way he was speaking was not okay. And so even though he'd been triggered, I wanted to put in a clear boundary to say, hey, happy to chat. We just got to keep it respectful and constructive. And so it was interesting. So I did put that in, and he sort of calmed down to a certain degree. And the interesting thing about this conversation is that, and this is what happens, I think, in a lot of difficult conversations, was that he had made a number of assumptions. He'd made the assumption that we'd left him out of the conversation. So he got on the phone, really frustrated. And as I said, I haven't spoken to him for a long time. He gets on and starts almost yelling at me. And so it's like, how do you manage that? How do you, and I know with sales, it's the customers getting on and having a go. And how do you manage that so you don't react, so you don't escalate, and also pull apart the component where they're going, okay, I'm trying to go, well, what is this concern? Why is he so frustrated? What is that about? And so it was a tricky conversation because I wasn't sort of prepared for it. It sort of came out of the blue in a way. And then the hard bit was not reacting myself and trying to keep it constructive and useful.
He's obviously got the story in his head that he's making up without having all the information. And that's obviously bringing up a whole lot of emotions. When you go to stop him to say, for us to continue this conversation, you know, let's make sure that we're being respectful. What was the response?
He did calm down. It was tricky because I was obviously being triggered. I had to manage my emotions to not react in that moment because I was feeling really like this is unreasonable and unfair. And so my challenge
Yeah.
was not to react. And that's where the skill comes in, I guess, because I'm aware of that and I'm tuning into myself and being mindful about what's going on for me. And then the skill really is the tone in which I said that. Because if I had have said it in a heightened, aggressive, shark-like tone, it would have escalated further. He probably would have hung up.
When you're in the situation with a stranger, and the scenario that you've gone through personally, I see businesses face lots of times, and salespeople face this lots of times. So there is a customer who is, reasonably passive, as in they're engaging with you only when they want something or need something. You could call it a transactional relationship. And then all of a sudden, one morning, and you might be having a really good morning, you get this phone call or you get a pretty nasty email, and they have literally come out of nowhere and almost sucker punched you. And like you said, they'll attack things like, you haven't done this, clearly your team's useless, or you don't care about my business, or whatever those things are that customers generally tend to complain about. They're just looking to get the emotion out. And so what do you do? What would be your advice in terms of handling that situation with a stranger, with maybe telling your customer to stop and speak to me respectfully? I guess with those explicit words may not land well, but how could you handle it?
Yeah, tricky. I mean, it's always tricky when someone throws something at you which is more shark-like, and the challenge with any of these, as you say, whether it's with a customer, a colleague, a manager, or a family member, is how do you not react to that? How do you not play into the emotional component? And I think one of the things I was able to do yesterday was sort of not take it personally because I felt it was pretty unreasonable. So if you can not take it personally, I think that is number one. And then if you have that ability to do that, I think it's then, okay, help me understand what your concern is here. What is the concern? What's driving this frustration? So it's more about getting to and this is what I do as a mediator. So obviously I've done 500 formal mediations where people are in heightened conflict and they often will say things in a unhelpful, attacking way where I need to put in a clear boundary and say, okay, I need to pause you there. And then I want to say, okay, so what's this about? How can you say that in a more constructive way? Now, as a mediator, I have that. That's my role. So it's harder when it's a customer. How do you put in those boundaries? I think there does have to be a certain level of, hey, I do need to pull this person up. I don't think it's okay that someone can be abusive or threatening and we just let that go because they're the customer. So it's about knowing where that level is of acceptable behavior and when do we try to, and I guess the other skills in this when someone's heightened is that probably the best skill and something I've learned as a mediator. I also, I don't know if you've heard of Chris Voss. He's a hostage negotiator in the US. Yeah. So he has this thing, and it's interesting because it's almost exactly the same thing I do as a mediator when parties are heightened. And his biggest tool that he talks about to try to de-escalate someone who is heightened is to just do a simple technique of labeling. So what that means is labeling the emotion that you feel that person is feeling currently. And he even has phrases like, he might say, oh, it seems like, it feels like that you're feeling this way. And it's all in the tone again. It's all that tone, how we do that. So I call it acknowledgement of emotions. And when I'm dealing with some parties in conflict or a heightened person, if we acknowledge how they're feeling, it can really help to de-escalate. And even with my brother yesterday, I did acknowledge, I can understand why you're frustrated. I can understand why that has triggered you. And when we do that, it does some things in the brain. It helps to reduce the level of activity in the amygdala. And so there's actually a physiology and a brain chemistry associated, and they've done tests and all that sort of thing on it. So it actually helps to reduce their level of agitation, and it helps to bring them more into the logical thinking brain. So that acknowledge of emotion, not taking it personally, and trying to really go, okay, it sounds like you're really frustrated. What's the key issue for you here? What's the main concern you have here? So you almost like, because I studied at Harvard and I went to their negotiation training, and one of the, I think it was Professor Gabriella Blum, who spoke about not, she talked about noise and how people can, sort of use all these tactics to try to manipulate or whatever intention they have. But if we sort of avoid or ignore that what you call white noise, and just go back to, okay, so what's the concern here? Help me understand that. And let's address this together in a collaborative way. We sort of then, if we don't get caught up in it, we're then managing what's the concern. Just like my brother yesterday. Okay, what's the concern? Oh, you felt left out of that conversation. Well, actually, we didn't even have that conversation. It got lost in everything that was going on. So let's look at what can be done from here. How do we move forward from here?
So I know in customer service trainings or a phone support training, there's often discussions around de-escalating angry customers.
Yeah.
And it's managing yourself as the operator. You're meant to, the angrier they get, the more calmer you're meant to get, because the other party almost is expecting a fight, and if you give them a fight, you end up in a shouting match. And I like the tips that you shared around the immense amount of self-management that one should be thinking around, and making sure that we're not biting back, because that escalates the situation rather than get to the root cause of the problem. Because that's really what you're saying, is to ignore the shouting, ignore, in your scenario, it was a bit of swearing, etc. And try and look underneath that to say, well, what's causing this trigger? Why do you feel so frustrated? And now feel like you need to take it out on me? Let's talk about that, because maybe we don't have the right or the same perspective.
Yeah, nice. Same information, same understanding. What may have we misinterpreted or assumed about the other, and that's exactly what had happened in that situation. So there's another little concept that I like, and it's a martial arts, and I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Aikido or Aikido. And so this martial arts is very different to most other martial arts, where you don't fight back. You don't fight or you don't force. So when someone comes at you, you actually use their momentum to throw them in a nice way, of course. What the concept and why I like it and how it relates to either conflict or difficult conversations is that you're not fighting back. You're not, as you said, biting back. You're not fighting back. You're letting it pass, and then you're bringing it back to, okay, what's your concern here? How can we address this concern? And that's the trick. It's not taking it personally and managing your emotions. because as soon as you get caught up in it, it escalates and then it sort of gets very messy. So that's one of the hardest things in conflict or difficult conversations, is actually managing your emotions so you don't get drawn in, caught up, and it can either, people, obviously I've seen lots in meet. I've seen chairs thrown in mediation. I was doing a 10-party mediation in Nimbin where we had 5 from each side. We weren't far into the mediation when all of a sudden the CEO picks up her chair, she throws it and tells everyone to F off. And then on her way out, she picked up another
The CEO
chair.
does.
The CEO, and she threw that one too. So, she, and I looked around the room and I go, wow, that was full on, wasn't it? And they looked at each other and then they looked at me and they go, no, she does that all the time.
They were really comfortable with that. They were like, actually, this is not the tricky part.
I was sort of used to it, which was unfortunate. Anyway, she calmed down and came back in, said sorry, and we continued on. She's a nice person, actually. I know her pretty well now, but she struggles with the emotions. She gets triggered really quickly, and the filter, the mindfulness to manage that is still a learning process for her. But I think for a lot of people, we all struggle with that trigger. And as soon as we get caught in that, we're going to struggle with conflict. And it's probably better to end the conversation if you feel totally triggered and say, look, I'm really struggling and I think we should have a break and come back. Because I think it's better to pause, say what's going on for you, and then come back rather than trying to work through something when you're too triggered. And that's like in a mediation. So parties come in, they start talking through issues. And if one of them gets too triggered, I will ask, how you going? What's going on? What do you try to get those emotions on the table? But if they're overwhelmed, I'm going to call a break because it's not going to be useful to continue.
Yeah. So I guess my 2 questions are, one, what might be some of the suggestions you make in terms of trying to figure out your trigger indicators? And the other question I want to ask about is specifically around communication styles and who tends to get fired up more than others. And so let me talk about that a little bit more. I tend to find I've got quite a direct communication style. If I was triggered, anger was my standard response. Now, that might be the outward projected emotion, though internally, it might be feeling frustrated, hurt, scared, whatever those things are. But what I'm displaying might come across as anger. And I realized through DISC, which is a product that I tend to utilize. I'm also now a coach for DISC as well, because I believe knowing how you communicate and your communication styles is really important. I learned that because I have this direct communication style, I tend to be really quick to jump to potentially conclusions. And then, of course, that means it fires me up. So as part of understanding this part of me, I then started to focus on my triggers, because when you start to lead a team, you can't be the person that gets up and throw the chair, even though that's kind of what you feel like you want to do on the inside. And so I would sit and try and observe myself anytime a situation made me uncomfortable and I could feel getting angry. I could feel my hands starting to get sweaty and my throat choking up a little bit, and I could really feel temperature on my face. And I remember being in a conversation once in a boardroom with somebody. Something triggered me and I was feeling so frustrated. I remember saying to the person, I understand the message that you are trying to deliver to me. It's just that I feel like my face is melting off right now. So I need to leave and go for a little bit of a walk around the building. Can we pause this meeting and then let's pick it up once I feel like I've calmed down? I think 2 hours later we resumed the conversation. I understood the intent of the conversation. They were trying to help me. It made sense. I was much more open to listening. But it took an immense amount of self-control. An immense amount of self-control to not just shut the conversation down and then write the person off. As in, no, I'm done with you. You are wrong. I'm not going to listen to this. I'm moving on. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you've sort of summarized it nicely, because I think it is that self-awareness, like knowing what triggers you have and knowing how to manage those triggers. Because if we're not self-aware, we get sucked into them, we get caught up in them, the emotions escalate further, and then we usually do something that we regret later. I like the term mindfulness because I've been traveling to India for 25 years practicing meditation and mindfulness. And it's that ability to be aware of, I guess, a couple of things in a conflict or a difficult conversation. One is what's going on for us, and being able to have the strategies to manage that. I think it's also being able to tune into the other, and that's where mindfulness is really powerful. It's like being able to be present with that person when you're having that conversation. And it's also being aware of your presence and noticing your impact. So it is noticing how you say things, so your tone, even how much you're saying. And, for me, one of the key components of a difficult conversation is that it's a two-way conversation. It's not one way. It's like, hey, I have a certain perspective and I have some concerns I would like to address. And I'm really keen to see how you see it and your perspective on this, because I know there's information I'm not going to be aware of. And then it's about, once we understand each other, how do we find a way forward that's sort of going to work for us both? That's going to address the concerns, and it's also going to identify what needs there are. So there's a little acronym that I think is really powerful and that's really useful in almost any conflict or difficult conversation, and it spells out CINO. So there's no H in it. It's just CINO, CINO. So what it stands for is, and I call them the four magic questions, because they're the only questions, other than clarifying questions, that you need to ensure you cover in a conflict, in a difficult conversation. So what they stand for is, what are your concerns? So have you drawn out, say if we're in a difficult conversation, Varun, or some conflict, do I understand your concerns clearly? What are the key issues for you? So I want to get your concerns. I also need to ensure that you understand my concerns. So we want to draw out concerns. So that's the C. The I stands for important. So why is this issue that we're talking about important for me, and why is it important for you? Because sometimes, and particularly in sales, you can get into positional bargaining. You can get very stuck in, I always think of Bali and doing the haggling, and that's that, as you know, that sort of positional bargaining or negotiation. We want to move it into interest-based negotiation, where what we're trying to focus more on is what's underneath that position they have. And understanding their concerns and why it's important will draw that out. Once we understand each other, and that's the whole idea in a difficult conversation and a conflict, is to understand each other, even if we see it differently. And then once we have an understanding, We then move it to, okay, what do you need? What's going to work here? What do you need regarding this, and what do I need? And then what can we both offer each other? What's the things that we can offer that's going to make this work? And, that's also acknowledging there are some constraints sometimes. I can't reduce the price to half. I'd love to.
Yeah.
So considering that this is the pricing point, what else can we do? What else can I offer that's going to work for you, that's going to make this work for you? So it's so that's CINO: concerns, important, needs, and offer. And I know in almost every difficult conversation or conflict situation, they're really important questions to draw out from both sides.
I like the simple structure of it, and it's really easy for anyone to follow. What I like about the structure is two things. It really leans into selling skills of curiosity. If we do have a customer scenario or a colleague or a business unit and they are coming out attacking, we want to lean into that selling skill of curiosity to find out what are those real underlying concerns. And anyone that's in sales utilizes this skill every day. It's a fundamental part of consultative selling. You ask good questions. You don't look at surface level symptoms. You drill further in and you look for underlying problems, because solving symptoms doesn't necessarily fix the problem. You gotta delve deeper, and that absolutely translates into this model of CINO. The other thing you talked about when you spoke of both importance and need is that negotiation skill. If someone is looking for a cheaper price, really all they're saying is, I'm looking for more value. Do you think you can deliver it? Without necessarily the right level of training, salespeople misinterpret pricing objections as a problem with the number versus looking behind it where the customer maybe hasn't seen the value or is not seeing enough value. And so they are now counter offering you what they feel this offer is worth. And that's where I think understanding what are the components that are important to somebody really allows you to bring other things to the table that might not necessarily be obvious in that first pass. This is really well connected to standard selling methodology.
As you say, we get beneath it a little bit. Often people are on the surface and it's like, well, what's this really about? Help me understand, and help me understand what would work for you. What's missing? What's important here? What do you need here? And what can, and the thing is, it's like, what can we both offer each other? In a conflict or a difficult conversation, it shouldn't be one way. It's about what can we both do here to make this work.
I like the direction we're heading in, because we've spoken about trying to understand difficult conversations and then how it can turn into conflict, or you could have a conflict. Sometimes if we avoid those difficult conversations, we've spoken about some of that curiosity that we need to bring into the conversation. Talked about self-management. It's such a key part of going into any of these challenging conversations, and then being aware of those triggers. I like the CINO model that you've shared with me. We've spoken about pricing objections and how those might be challenging conversations that salespeople can handle. What about taking responsibility? So I have a customer, there's been a problem. There's been a problem in terms of the delivery of product and service. And let's assume either we are at fault or the people that we work with, as in our contractors, has created an issue. And now, of course, we want to continue this relationship. So we want to make sure that we mend bridges. We have resolved this problem that we may have faced, and then move forward. So what do we do? How do we rebuild some of this trust? If we've made a mistake, obviously it's caused the shark bite to come out, and now we want to move forward. So what's some of your advice there?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest things especially in conflict and difficult conversations, is around taking ownership or responsibility, or acknowledging your contribution to the situation. Because what I see a lot of is blame and focus on the other and what they've done. And I think if we can go into a situation like that where you have contributed, I like the word contributed, because often it is not always one way. So owning our part, and trying to take responsibility, and this is the hard bit, without excuses. So trying to own it without minimizing, defending, blaming, or excusing. And I think the way you do that is by acknowledging your part and then trying to understand the impact that has had. So if we ask them about the impact, or we acknowledge what we think might be the impact, and then ask them, is that accurate? Is that correct? I think that's a big way for them to understand you're trying to understand what this mistake or contribution has caused. And once we understand that, it's about, okay, I'd come back to CINO again. What do you need here? What's important for you for us to be able to move forward, and that we have a positive ongoing relationship.
I like this impact word that you've utilized, and actually delve deeper into that. I came to realize that part of our business, everything that we did had some sort of a flow-on effect for somebody else. Our customer services team or sales team, who would constantly have customers calling up and feeling upset. And normally it was things like late deliveries around product or services. Hearing conversations where you could hear a little bit of deflection. I can't say that I come across any situations where that de-escalated the situation. Most of those conversations, I think the customer got even more frustrated and then wanted to speak to someone even more senior. And obviously, when it comes to senior staff who have more experience, that understand impact, the overall impact on someone else's business, they don't resolve the issue. They just listen to the customer, and they acknowledge the impact that the other party has faced. I remember having many conversations with customers to say, listen, I understand the challenge with the delayed delivery. Let's talk about what this means for you. Like right now, what's happened, and what is it that we can do to get you out of this problem right now?
I like that, because I think the thing that I've found, whether it's difficult conversation or in conflict, what people want, and it's so powerful, and I think we forget to do it. What people want is they want to feel heard and understood. So when people feel heard and understood, they're able to let go more, not necessarily totally. It will de-escalate. It's like the acknowledgement of emotions as well. You've got to make sure you are hearing what they're saying. And I think one of the best techniques in that, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is just that reflective listening. It's saying, so Varun, what I'm hearing you saying there is that because your package hasn't been delivered on time, what it actually means is this, this, and this. Is that correct? Okay, so I've got that clear. So how do we move forward? What's going to assist you now? What do you need from us that we can provide that's going to create will remove this issue, this concern that you have. So I think sometimes we get caught up in the conversation and we just want to say how we see it, or we want to defend our position or our perspective, and we forget to do the reflective listening. And then they don't feel heard and understood, and they will escalate. If you don't feel that someone's listening, someone's acknowledging, understand the impact, you are going to get more frustrated.
There are, I believe, very clear clues when a customer doesn't feel like they're not being heard, because they will repeatedly say, listen, I don't think you're listening to me. I don't think you're hearing what I'm saying. And I think at the surface level, you sometimes have people in customer services and sales that will say, no, I'm hearing exactly what you're saying. But I believe what the customers are implying is, I don't believe you understand the impact of what you haven't delivered is having on me, my business, the outcome, etc. And that's what really causes people to get fired up.
And they don't repeat it back. I mean, if you don't repeat it back, because it's so easy to misinterpret what they're saying or not getting a clear picture. So by interpreting it back, it's demonstrating that you have heard it. And it sounds simple. It's not always easy to do well because you're not listening properly. It's just that it has a very powerful impact if you do it.
I'm going to take my salesperson's hat off and I'm going to put on my sales management hat on. Now, I'm responsible for a sales team. They are meant to go out and bring in the numbers. Sales is very transparent. It's really easily measurable. And as part of any standard sales teams, you will have a scale in terms of how people are performing. The reason, whether those numbers are up, down, or flat, can be external factors, can be internal factors. Sometimes what happens is sales leaders will avoid a conversation. They will literally avoid a conversation with some team members because you're not looking to become too aggressive. And I say that because I face that scenario where really direct, really performance focused, without development, I would have quite a frank conversation. Now, the challenge with a frank conversation is it's a one-way conversation. And so the other person doesn't come away feeling supported. They come away feeling verbally slapped. And so when we're looking to connect, and when we have this pressure around results, etc., what's your advice for sales managers, GMs, business owners, sales leaders? How do they have those conversations and make sure that their expectations are communicated clearly without necessarily the person feeling verbally slapped and they don't hear the core message? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, good question. I think a couple of things I think of. One is, one of the concepts that I share in my training is around a balance between assertiveness and empathy. So we want to be clear about what concerns we have, and we want to understand how they see it. So if we go into that conversation, we do also need to be mindful about how we start that conversation, because if I start a conversation by saying, hey, Varun, I want to talk about your numbers. They're really low and I've got a real problem with them. We're going to get defensiveness, resistance, shutdown, maybe triggers, escalation, all unhelpful. Whereas if I say, hey, Varun, look, I just want to explore your results over the last few weeks and just have a little conversation about where you think you're at and chat through, I guess, how we can, how can we address a few issues there. So I want to start by throwing it to you actually and just saying, How do you feel your performance has gone over the last 3 or 4 weeks? Where do you think you're at in terms of your sales? How are you feeling about your role currently? So I might even start by saying, "Hey, tell me where you think things are at." Now, if you go, "Oh no, I reckon I'm doing all right," I'm just a few whatever, but uh, then I'll be saying, "Well, look, Varun, I am somewhat concerned about your figures. So if we look at those, I've seen some decline in sales, and I guess I want to look at that and work out how these can change." And so that's why I want to understand what's going on for you and how you see things. And I'd really like to work with you to come up with a clear strategy that we see some change in those figures. How would that sit, do you think, as a conversation with a staff member?
The first felt like an attack straight away, whereas the second was much more exploratory. Let's dive in, let's have a look at it, let's have a discussion about it. And for the people that are listening and watching, I would recommend going back to this point and rewatching the examples that Scott provided, because the first felt like an attack, a personal attack, and I had to resist not folding my arms. I've got another camera set up which can see me at times around my body language, and I guess when we get attacked, we do try and protect ourselves, versus an exploratory conversation where you think, okay, fantastic, yep, because we're looking to solve this issue together, rather than it's a my problem, just me. I am the problem.
Yeah, because it's come from the perspective that I'm not sure what's going on for you, how you're seeing things. And look, it might be different if this is the fifth conversation. We might be doing it a little bit differently. If it's the first one, I want to be just mindful about how I started, because most people start by making the person the problem, and that's not helpful. So if we more identify the issue as an issue, let's talk about performance, let's talk about sales figures. I want to get your perspective on that. You're going to get a different reaction than saying, "I think you are performing poorly and we need to have a chat about it." So it's being mindful about how you start, and then it's going, "Help me understand where you're at." And, oh wait, I never used the word but, I use the word and. It's called the and stance. I also want to share my concerns. So my concerns at the moment is because the sales have gone down, I'm concerned for these reasons, and this is the potential impact on us as a team, as a business, and so we need to look at addressing this. So what do you think we need to do differently? What do you feel is not working at the moment that perhaps has worked better in the past? How can we identify what's going on here? So it's a very collaborative, doesn't mean I'm passive. I know we spoke about the conflict characters at the start. Passive is a teddy bear who is just trying to keep the other person happy. So I'm not being passive, I'm trying to understand and be assertive. So that's the empathy versus assertiveness.
You've mentioned the conflict characters. Is this something that you cover in one of your workshops?
I do in my conflict workshop. We look at the conflict characters, and it's a bit like, it's not the same. It's a little bit like the DISC profiling. With the conflict characters, it's probably more the one you default to. So do you default to the teddy bear, the pleaser, the turtle, the hides, or the shark that's aggressive? Or can you be conscious, and we talked about that earlier, about being mindful about how we're being triggered, or the emotional component. And just like yesterday with my brother, I was being triggered and I still tried to go to the assertive, putting in a boundary, and also sharing my concerns and a willingness to hear his concerns. So it's that balance between the two, making sure that it's done in a constructive way. So it's probably more that propensity that we default to a particular character, and it's being aware of that. So we try not to do that. We like you got caught up in your emotions in that board meeting, and you knew that you had to have some time. Otherwise, you probably would have acted like a shark, and you knew that was not going to be wise or helpful for anyone.
Now, you've already shared an immense amount of value of some of the things that we should be thinking about. I talked about the curiosity, self-management, the triggers, going through CINO and having a really, really good understanding of those areas. Let's now talk about, you said you don't use the word but. So explain that. I know, because I utilize this, I'm going to say 90% of the time, and I try and avoid the word but explain it, because there will be a lot of people that aren't necessarily sure of the and stance.
You just said, but explain it.
Look at that. That's why I said 90% of the time.
It's so funny because I think it's so ingrained in us to use the word but. And what it does, especially in a difficult conversation, if I say, oh, yeah, but what it's saying to you is what you just said does not count. So the challenge is being mindful enough to change that word, however is not good either, it's just a nicer but. So it's trying to change the word but to an and. So Varun, I'm hearing you're saying this, this, and this, and I guess the way I see it is this, this, and this. So it's not discounting what you're saying, and it's not saying how I see things. I see things my way, you see things your way. That's okay. It's a mindset of realizing that people are going to have their own experiences, their own ways of seeing things, and we need to be open to the other's perspective, and without dismissing it, without discounting it. And that's where the end stance is so powerful, because it's saying you can see it this way and I can see it that way, and that's okay. Because in a conflict situation, it's not like I'm trying to get the parties to agree on how they perceive the situation. They can see it very differently, and we go, okay, well, you both see it differently. That's okay. How do we move forward? What do you both need here to change this dynamic, to change this conflict, to address this key issue? So it's an acceptance of each other's perspective without one having to be right or wrong. And that's what the end stance is. And it's very powerful, because if you use the word but, it will say to that person, you don't care what I think, you do not value what I think.
How I've always understood the use of and instead of but, especially when having conversations, is and allows the conversation to keep moving forward and continue. So it's taking on what we've already discussed and moving forward, but feels like we've shut down everything up to the point when I said but, and we're starting all over again. And I find the way that I practice this, so that when I'm giving feedback, especially with team members, etc., is to utilize it at home, especially with my children. So when my kids are in the swimming pool, they'll come out and we'll talk about saying, amazing effort, this is what we did. And next week, what we're going to focus on is XYZ, whatever that thing is. And I found the more I practiced it in my home life, the better I got at utilizing it when I was having a discussion with someone else. Obviously, in casual conversation, I still use but when it counts, I tend to utilize and very mindfully.
Yeah, it's breaking habits often because most people will use the word but and not be aware of it, and that's the challenge.
What I want to go to is now some of the workshops that you offer. So take me through. Obviously, we've spoken about difficult conversations. If we avoid them, they can turn into conflict. So this is really a skill that we aren't going to magic up. It is something we have to go and seek out and learn. And so this is the work that you obviously do. You do across Australia. You provide these trainings face to face and virtually as well. So take me through those.
Yeah, look, probably my most popular training is difficult conversations because, as we've spoken about today, it's a tricky thing to do well. And so most people need training in it. And I do that across the Asia Pacific, either face to face or virtually. It's really interesting. I was doing another big training that's very popular is team culture. So I actually go into teams primarily who aren't working well. The dynamics aren't good, and we work on identifying those concerns, what's getting in the way of working well, being productive, and also the dynamics between different team members. And we find ways forward, solutions, action plans, and that sort of thing. And I was doing one actually just this week, a face-to-face workshop, and it was really interesting because the first day we did team culture, and one of the things I identified was not speaking up, not having those conversations with another team member, and they were sort of coming up with a solution of, well, we'll just go to our supervisor instead of having a conversation with our colleague. And I sort of had to challenge them on that and say, well, what's stopping you from having that conversation proactively early on? Because often one of the reasons why I'm called into team culture is because they're not having these conversations. They're not doing it early enough. So the dynamics get unhealthy, even toxic sometimes. And so for me, it's about, okay, well, what do you need? And what's missing often is a clear model. And that's what I offer in the training is a clear model in having those conversations where it is collaborative, you're going in curious, you're seeking to understand, you're using CINO, and you're trying to come out with an agreement that both people involved or multiple people are comfortable with and committed to. And it can be done. I've seen it if you've got the right way of going about, the right mindset, open and curious, going with the right intention to understand, be understood, and doing it in that way where it's collaborative. I'm hearing you, I'm trying to understand your perspective, I'm being assertive about mine. Hey, it's hard to do wrong, even though there's the emotions in it. And there's a few techniques I share in that one as well in terms of dealing with challenges, which are very powerful too. So that's probably most popular. The team culture one, obviously I have ones on conflict, and probably the one for leaders that I'm finding is most popular and most useful at the moment is around psychological safety. How do you create an environment for your team where your people do feel safe to speak up? And how do you manage that? And part of that's based on Amy Edmondson's work, who's probably the leader in psychological safety. So it's a really interesting, powerful workshop for leaders to take back to their teams and create that really strong, healthy, open, transparent environment.
That's such an amazing topic, and one that I was exposed to way too late in my leadership career. Early on, when you have a lot of positional power, also you think, I was thinking, oh, no one's speaking up. I guess they have nothing to say, without realizing that some of my communication style was actually, it wasn't making it psychologically safe, and there were some amazing ideas that were actually being suppressed. And I think that's a really big takeaway for me. If you're a performance-led business owner, general manager, sales leader, this is an area that you must do some development on, because there is an immense amount of performance that your team is it's being held back just because of you. And I know it based on personal experience. We've spent a lot of time talking about difficult conversations and conflict and tying it back into the world of sales. I love the CINO concept and how well it ties in with consultative selling, with curiosity and making sure that you are understanding the other side. So I can see how the episode is going to add value to both salespeople and business owners as well. Now, I'm going to put into the show notes all of the links so that you can find Scott and his business called Fighting Fear. All the links will be available, as well as to all his workshops, and of course his new podcast, which is Conflict Stories. So you want to be listening out to that. But otherwise, Scott, I want to thank you so much for spending this time and working with me from a sales perspective and tying in that conversation around the expertise that you have. This is what I'm really looking to bring to, the listeners and the people who are watching either on YouTube or listening on Spotify and any of their podcasts.
No worries, Varun. It's been enjoyable working through all your issues. It's been a little bit of work, but no, it's been great, because I really like how you've shared your journey and what you've learned and how it ties into a lot of those concepts. So it's really useful. So the other thing I do, just let listeners know, is that I do speaking. So if you have a staff conference or any sort of conference, I do speak about these topics to large audiences or smaller audiences or whoever wants me.
Talk to me about your public speaking award.
I was awarded the Breakthrough Speaker of the Year a few years ago, which was very nice. I'm part of the Professional Speakers of Australia. I'm also what they call a CSP, which is a Certified Speaking Professional. And that is awarded it's a worldwide global award. And I think only 15% of speakers have achieved that award. So I'm happy about that. It means I won't bore your audience.
Hey, look, I have been to your workshops. You have an amazing, calming voice. You keep everybody engaged. I highly recommend your workshops to everybody that I tend to meet. I want to thank you for your time. And I look forward to doing more podcasts with you in the future sometime.
Thank you, Varun. Thanks for having me on, and great being on. It was a great chat.